Welcome to Mayo Clinic Q&A. I'm Dr. Helena Gazelka. Thanks for joining us today. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us have found ourselves at home and teleworking. And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be an end in sight to this right now. As the physical boundaries between work and home blur, what happens to our work-life balance? We're lucky today because here to discuss this with us today is the Director of Integrative Health and Wellness at the Mayo Clinic in Florida, Dr. Adam Perlman. Thanks for being here today, Adam.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Many people are working from home now, and it feels like we're living at work sometimes. Why is work-life balance important?
Let me say something a little controversial. I'm going to say work-life balance is not important, but work-life integration is. And I'm saying this a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I think it's been out there now in the literature, this concept of work-life integration, and that's always resonated a little bit more with me. And part of the argument is that balance implies this sort of 50-50. And even prior to this moment, you know, most of us weren't typically working 50% of the time and then being with our family or our home lives 50% of the time. And increasingly, prior to this moment, there was this integration, sometimes a challenging integration where work would tend to invade our home and private time with, you know, constantly being connected to the various devices and what have you. I think it's been an interesting moment with so many more people working from home, as you've commented on, that's really, I think, accelerated this concept of work-life integration. And I would imagine for certain people in negative ways and for some people in very positive ways. So it kind of depends on what your home environment is like, I would imagine. You know, are you in a relationship with people at home that is functional and healthy, or has there been a great deal of friction? And how do you sort of find that right level of needing to maintain your work, particularly if you're working from home, needing to maintain or wanting to maintain the other relationships in your life, and find that kind of balance that we could use as a word, but ultimately it's not a 50-50. It's how do we effectively integrate? And why is it so important, to answer your question, is because of all the things that happen when we don't do that effectively. You know, we begin to first and foremost often sacrifice ourselves or self-care. And that could be everything from taking care of ourselves literally, like working out, or it could be things like doing those other things that we enjoy, our hobbies that may now get sort of a second seat to work kind of constantly invading our home environment. I think the other thing that happens as we sacrifice self-care is we can become more burnt out, and it can affect not only, I think, us and we can suffer, but our loved ones can suffer as well.
I love the term that you used, integrative, because often I've been asked, you know, as a mom and as a wife, well, do you have work-life balance and how do you maintain that? And I've often thought, not really. Work goes home with me at night. I'm married to another physician. We're busy. We have a lot of responsibilities outside of work, but related to work. So I like that term. I think that's very useful. What tips do you have then for how people can separate their work time and then their personal time?
And I've heard different things. It's funny, even yesterday from two different patients. One described how it's been really nice because her husband hasn't been traveling, right? But then she also described that she works from home typically, and she's not used to having to sort of balance kind of her work during the day with her husband being around and them talking and being in relationship. And one of the things that she had described that I think is really important is to create space potentially if we are working from home, right? I mean, create space. She was literally talking about she has her office space that she really tries to sort of designate for work-related activities, and then she wanted to start to do a little more meditation in her case, but she didn't want to do it in the office. So she was looking to create a separate space so she could literally physically keep a distance between sort of what is work-related and is what is more around her and her home life. I think one of the things that is critically important in this moment, and at any time, but is to really be able to keep a routine. So again, it's whereas you might have gotten up in the morning and maybe you went to the gym first thing and showered and went to work, and it's easy now you get up and you start working. And so how do we sort of create a routine that allows us to know sort of when work begins, when we can sort of integrate activities that are important to us, and find that right sort of mix and right integration of all that we want to do in our home and personal lives as well as our work life. So the routine can be really critical to that. I want to add one other thing in too, because I learned this initially from an executive coach a number of years ago, and I found it really helpful, and it's kind of been a little bit reworked here to this concept of what I now call delegate, delete, and do. And I found it really helpful when I am talking with friends, colleagues, sometimes patients, and they're describing, feeling overwhelmed, which is a common, I think, experience, even well prior to all that's going on now with COVID-19. What do we do with that? And this idea of delegate, delete, do, I found to be very helpful. It's simple, but it's really in that moment. First of all, we need to be, use the word mindful, but we need to be sort of present and sort of sense, okay, what are we feeling now? I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I've got all this stuff to do at home and work. I'm never leaving. What can I do about that? Well, if we can stop in the moment and kind of take an inventory of all that we have on our plate, often we find there are things that we could delegate. Those could be work-related things, or it could be things at home. It could be that, boy, I need to get the food shopping done. Maybe my significant other is willing to do that for me so I can get this other task done. Sometimes it's at work, and there's things that we maybe don't need to do. And of course, often if it can be a win-win, meaning, so I was working on a presentation and I'm looking at some literature reviewing that I'm trying to do, and I realized that my assistant, who wants to go to medical school eventually, I could delegate some of that, and he actually would really enjoy kind of looking and doing this literature review and getting engaged in that. So, that's one thing. I think the delete is also one where sometimes when we look at that list, simply keeping things on the list can build anxiety for us. And sometimes we can say, all right, let's just take that off the list so I don't even have to think about it now. I can always bring it back later. The other piece to delete, which maybe I should create as a fourth thing that I really like, is sort of adjust the timeline. I think it's not there because it's not 3Ds. Easier to say delegate, delete, and do. But the adjust the timeline, again, can be really important. An example from right now is I have a book chapter due, and I had a bunch of things going on. And as I looked at all the things, I said, well, I know the editor's probably going to be fine if I get a little more time with that due date. So I emailed the editor. It was due July 1st, and they said, that's fine. Why don't you take till August 1st? So that sort of took that off the priority list temporarily, allowed me to do other things. And of course, that all relates to the final one, which is do, which is really understanding what is it that I really have to get done now. And that can be tricky when we're working from home because there's a number of other distractions going on. And so this idea of looking at that list and saying, all right, no matter what's going on, let me get these one or two things done first thing. That can be a very helpful strategy to help manage overwhelm and allow a better integration of our work and our lives.
I like delegate, delete, and do. I am happy to say that I have permanently delegated all grocery shopping and cooking to my husband.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions for us for disconnecting from our devices? I feel like even though you might be at home, now the expectation is that we're available either by text or by email, almost full time, even when we're not in the office.
It's interesting to be someone who has some expertise in this area, talk a lot, lecture a lot on it, and write about it. And none of us are perfect. So I would imagine if my wife and children, and I have 5 children actually, 17 to 27. So I've had plenty of practice with work-life integration and these sorts of things. And if they hear this, they will probably say to you that I check my phone way too much. And again, I think we all need to find the routines that work for us. And in a funny way, I actually find it in some ways more settling to keep up with some of my emails, but try to do that in a more disciplined way. So it's not just haphazard, but do you want to check it once an hour or whatever the case may be? Now, it's interesting when they've studied, at least American Americans, we tend to check our phones on average more than 80 times a day, right? And there are ways now to, with the app, with the new iPhones, and I'm sure the other phones do it as well, where they track how much screen time. And so that's one way to get a sense and build more awareness. But how do we disconnect? I think here's where routine is important, and sort of saying, all right, I have the phone on me all the time, or it's around me all the time. Can I set a routine where I'm not constantly looking at emails, text messages, what have you? Turning off notifications at certain times during the day. Again, I think there was a study that showed we have something like around 65 notifications for most people on average, where the phone is sort of telling you, do this or see this or whatever it may be. And so that's another way to kind of help us to stay disconnected. And then literally, again, physically removing the phone or putting it someplace where it's just not so tempting. There was a study that came out, I'm going to say maybe last year, that looked at willpower. It wasn't related to cell phones specifically, but I found it very, very interesting. And it was sort of like, well, they were trying to figure out, these people that are able to have all this willpower and, are able to go to the gym every morning, or they don't hit the snooze button, or whatever the case may be, or they're able to follow a diet, and what is it about them? And what was interesting was it turned out that it wasn't so much that they had willpower, it was that they had less temptation. And that, again, really resonated with me. And I'll try to use an example. So I do get up and go to the gym in the morning, right? That's just, that's kind of our workout typically, and when the gym's open. And I am not tempted typically to hit the snooze button. Now, I'll tell you, just for me, if I hit the snooze button, I typically, when I've tried it, I don't fall back asleep, and I sit there going, I really should go to the gym. And so I don't get the reward of like another hour of wonderful sleep, so I feel rested. So that temptation isn't there. Now, what the authors were saying was, if you are tempted by something like that, then one strategy is move the alarm clock to the other side of the room. So make it less easy to just hit that snooze button. And I would say the same thing about sort of our devices. If you just can't keep yourself from checking that cell phone constantly, then come up with a system where maybe, yes, you can still hear the emergency phone call or whatever it may be, because we can all make these excuses about why we always have to have it with us 24/7, but come up with a system where it's somewhat more difficult for you to just kind of habitually reach in and check that device. Put it on a top shelf, put it somewhere where it's a little bit less convenient. I think that can be a way that can be helpful. I think another sort of golden rule that I have broken on more than one occasion is to really not work from bed. Again, these are things that are out there in the literature that sometimes are easier or not so easy for some of us to implement, but, not checking your email the first thing you wake up in the morning and with that device. But again, as I've said at the beginning too, we all need to find what works for us, right? And continually evaluate what's working and as we try to live our best lives.
The COVID-19 pandemic has complicated things even more, because people are working from home, but we're also supposed to social distance. And so it's more difficult for people to stay connected to their loved ones and their friends. And do you have any suggestions during this time when we're distancing for that?
I actually am interested in how we can enhance the experience of connecting, using technology. I think it can never replace the face-to-face connection. But we've even done some things clinically where, like we here at Mayo have, the integrative program have a woman who does mind-body stress consultation, mind-body consultations. And interestingly, at her request, we've moved almost all of her interactions to virtual, because she doesn't mind seeing people in person, but she really can't read people's faces when they're wearing masks. And so it's been so hard for her to interact, but at least, of course, with a camera, you can take the mask off and she gets a better sense of sort of how they're responding to the kind of things that she's talking about with them and the kind of things that she's offering. So, I think it is limited when we have to wear these masks and whatnot. But I think, we need to do the best we can in this moment. And what I've tried to focus on and have encouraged others to do is more frequent touch points, brief calls, maybe using FaceTime, doing things like this, helping relatives that may be less comfortable with this kind of technology to get more comfortable with it. so that you can actually see people in addition to voice. Really setting an intention to connect frequently. And one of the things that I found that can be helpful is to connect the intention of connecting with friends and family to other habits or other things in our day as like a mini reminder. So, I'll just again use an example. As I said, I have 5 children. They were with me all up until just a few days ago. And with 2 boyfriends, we had 9 at one point. So a little crazy, but a lot of fun. And we're now down to pretty much empty nesters. So it's quite a big shift. And prior to COVID, though, I was already implementing this thing where I thought, all right, I want to stay in touch with my folks, my children. So I connected sort of calling someone with my ride home. I have about a 15-minute ride home, and I just sort of, now if I needed to, I could have put a little slip or reminder in my car to say, call somebody. But I pretty much kind of remember now when I get in the car, just, take those 10 minutes or so, rotate through the kids, give your folks a call, those kind of things as one of the things that I've done. Of course, I call people at other times, but, I'm just kind of making the point that sometimes we can connect sort of habits as a way to sort of make sure that we're implementing those things that we want to do in our lives. And certainly staying connected is so important. One of the things I often like to talk about, because it kind of blows me away, is the idea of loneliness. And of course, loneliness has become a real problem for many people. It was really an epidemic prior to COVID-19, with about 40% of Americans, feeling lonely on a fairly regular basis. And loneliness, this is what blows me away. Loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day as it relates to your health. And so, it was a problem prior, it's a real problem now. And I think we need to do our best to make sure that we, in any way possible, connect with those around us, even if it has to, in this moment, be, a little more reliance on technology than we would like.
I know that I have enjoyed Zoom meetings more than the phone meetings where we used to just call in that we would have at Mayo. And so I have thought many times what a very different experience this is with the technology that we have today than this would have been, 30 years ago or something like that. It's pretty amazing. I was amazed by what you said about the stress caused by loneliness. Yeah. 2020 has been an unbelievably stressful year for many people. So many losses of our typical life. Many people, for their jobs, have been compromised. And can you tell us a little bit about how stress affects us, and then how do we best manage it?
Stress potentially affects everything. And I think it's important to understand that there's a difference between sort of an acute stressor that, kind of triggers a fight or flight response that, is a way that we avoid danger, of course. And really what I think you're referring to, which is really the downstream long-term effects of chronic stress, which many people, again, were experiencing prior to this moment. And of course, this moment has only amplified for many, many people the stress that they're experiencing. And, I think when we think about stress, we can think about it really from a physical and mental and probably spiritual perspective as well. I think physically, it's almost sort of name your organ system, from the brain and emotion to the heart, to our intestines, to our immune system, even our skin. I mean, all kind, it can be affected by us having elevated levels of stress and the physiologic sort of effects of that elevated stress. And then, of course, emotionally, we know that stress can lead to increased anxiety, and then sort of things that can have their own implications, like disrupted sleep, right? Which, we may not be sleeping as well because we're feeling stressed, but then, of course, now we're dealing also with, sleep deprivation, or sort of the effects of not getting enough quality sleep. And so it really is all encompassing. I think it certainly takes, an integrative medicine, I would say, more holistic or whole person kind of an approach to really address stress, because it can be so impactful. And, I always feel like I get asked this question a lot, that maybe the answer is not rocket science. It's the actually executing that many of us find challenging. So, the truth is that we need to eat well and move, be physically active. We need to make sure that we're doing what we can to get a good night's rest. We want to make sure we're doing what we can to connect with others, right? And stay connected to the best of our ability. And I think one of the key things that can be particularly challenging is learning to better sort of manage our emotions and sort of by extension, kind of the way we think. One of the things that really creates a lot of undue suffering for people is this concept called mind wandering. Where we tend to sit there and worry about things that may or may not occur in the future, which can lead to a lot of anxiety often or fear. Or we tend to mind wander back to things that have happened in the past. That often can more commonly lead to anger or feeling upset. We think about, I don't know, an argument we had with a friend or spouse or something of that nature, and none of those two realities sort of exist anymore, right? What's done is done, and what's going to happen is going to happen. And again, as a friend used to say to me, I used to like this expression: you can never worry enough to affect the outcome, right? And so, not that there isn't utility in worrying and being concerned and planning. It's hurricane season. Okay, I'm concerned. Let me go do what I need to do. But often we kind of get caught up in this mind wandering, right? And so we're suffering in that moment. And one of the keys there is to learn to be more present in the moment, to recognize when we're doing that. That's where this concept of mindfulness comes in, because, it's not that you necessarily need to meditate, but the ability to be more aware of the present moment, sort of realize what we're feeling and sort of how we're thinking, and kind of diffuse that in the moment is really powerful, because often we don't recognize it. We're kind of just doing it, and it's catastrophizing or these other things that we can tend to do. And so, there's a lot of ways to cultivate mindfulness, or the ability to be more present. There's a number of apps out there, that can help people to be more present. And again, probably beyond sort of what we can do during this video podcast, but many ways, again, to become better adept at recognizing sort of what we're feeling emotionally, and sort of looking at how we're thinking to try to reduce some of the suffering that we're experiencing.
I had spoken with one of the psychiatrists here in Rochester prior to COVID, and we've been talking about that there's been an incredible increase in the amount of anxiety amongst different, age groups in the population, et cetera, that he found was pretty remarkable. Do you have any suggestion when people develop this anxiety that comes over them? Is there any suggestion for what they can do in the moment to help with that and then get that back under control?
Yes, I think it's always important to say during conversations of this nature that, we exist along a continuum. Some people describe this well-being continuum, physical well-being, but our mental well-being, right? And so sometimes in, any given moment, certainly any given day or week or what have you, we have times we're feeling kind of stressed out, times maybe hopefully we're feeling happy or less stressed out. Of course, it can tip to another end of the spectrum where we're, feeling prolonged distress that's really impacting our lives, or, we're feeling even down and unable to get out of bed and things of that nature that really should trigger us to speak to a health professional. So I just want to make that comment that, there are, like this psychiatrist that you spoke to, psychologists, others who can, help. And that's sort of a low threshold for people to seek help either directly or go to their primary care doc or whomever their primary health providers are. But I think there's also a lot that we can do. And this could be, again, we could talk for hours about this. I will describe a technique that can be very helpful, that comes out of positive psychology, and we sort of call it map it, sort of trap it, map it, zap it. And so, again, it's this concept of in the moment. If we stop for a second, we're all pretty good at identifying what emotion we're feeling. Like, am I feeling angry? Am I feeling scared? Am I feeling anxious? Or am I feeling guilty? What is that emotion? If we then stop and say, well, what is the thought that's behind that emotion? And often there is a dominant sort of thought and belief that's behind that emotion. So, let me maybe try to give an example. I have to do this presentation today, right? This talk with you. Okay, so, I get asked, would you mind coming on? And okay, sure, I'd be happy to. We'd like to talk to you about work-life balance and stress. And okay, great. Well, maybe I'm feeling anxious that I have this. It's coming up. Got to get ready for it. All right, I can recognize from why am I feeling anxious? Well, what if I don't do well? What if you ask me questions that I don't know the answer to? Okay, there's the thought that's driving the fear, right? I'll make a fool out of myself, whatever it might be, or the anxiety. Well, if I challenge that thought, well, wait a minute. I mean, you know this subject matter pretty well. You give lectures all the time on this. Talk about it a lot. You write about it. How likely is it that you're going to be asked a question and just kind of go, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. That's pretty unlikely. And even if I didn't know the answer, not that I have the answer to every question, first of all, we probably get edited out anyways, right? And so do I need to be feeling that anxiety in that moment? Now, at the same time, to the degree that I have a sense of what you're going to be asking, let me make sure that if I needed to brush up on a few things, double check the percentage of people that use their cell phones or whatever it might be to make sure I didn't give misinformation. All right, well, that's prepping, but I don't really need to feel overly anxious about it because really, I should do fine with this interview today because it's something I know very well. And so again, this idea of sort of recognizing the emotion, trying to understand what is the thought behind that, and then challenging that thought to see how valid it is. And if there is something valid, like, gee, maybe I'm not prepared. Okay, let me go get prepared. Otherwise, sort of letting it go. And again, with practice, one can become much more adept at implementing that in the moment. And I would again emphasize that mindfulness, being able to sort of stop and be aware for a moment, can be very helpful with that.
Can you tell us just briefly about the Department of Integrative Health and Wellness?
Although we have programs on all three of our major campuses, I'm personally based in Florida, and I came here over a year and a half ago, but to help develop this program. There had been a pilot prior, and so we now have several acupuncturists, we have nutrition, we have massage therapy, we have mind-body medicine, as I was describing earlier. So that can be, well, I don't really know how to cultivate mindfulness. I can meet with someone now who can work with me and do things like relaxation techniques, biofeedback. And the other thing that I'm particularly excited about is that we now have health coaches that can work with people even, again, telephonically. And the reason that was so important for me to implement here is that, as you've already heard me say, I mean, so much of what we need to do to be resilient in this moment, and not only just be resilient, but really grow from this moment, involves our behaviors and things that we do have a level of control over, but that can be so difficult for people. So the health coach is someone who can really help people, not to give them a plan, not to tell them to do 2 more push-ups. That's not what we're talking about here. It's really about helping them to think through a plan that they're willing to engage in and really understand why it's important to them and work through barriers and things of that nature. So we've just started that now just a couple of months ago because we really wanted to help people to be able to make lifestyle changes that are sustainable for them. So, and of course I see patients as well. So there's physician consultations as well. We look really broadly at what kind of options are out there to help both treat disease as well as improve overall quality of life.
What a wonderful resource and opportunity for our patients. I learned 2 great things from you today. Delegate, delete, and do, and trap it, map it, and zap it. Very useful. Thanks so much, Dr. Adam Perlman, who's the Director of Integrative Health and Wellness in the Mayo Clinic in Florida. We have really enjoyed having you on today. I know this is going to be very helpful. Thanks to all of you, too, for joining us on Mayo Clinic Q&A. We wish you a wonderful day.
Mayo Clinic Q&A is a production of the Mayo Clinic News Network and is available wherever you get and subscribe to your favorite podcasts. To see a list of all Mayo Clinic podcasts, visit newsnetwork.mayoclinic.org. Then click on Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and be well. We hope you'll offer a review of this and other episodes when the option is available. Comments and questions can also be sent to Mayo Clinic News Network at mayo.edu.